Marilyn Rose Monroe had always been the kind of person who saved receipts, made lists, and marked dates on the calendar with red pen. Since James died 3 years earlier, she'd turned her saving habit into a silent mission. It wasn't about saving money for the sake of it, but about keeping alive a plan that had been hatched in the hospital when he'd breathlessly said, "Promise me you'll come back to Hawaii someday, even if it's without me?" She promised, and now every penny she saved had a clear destination. It wouldn't just be a trip. It would be a reunion of all the pieces she felt had been torn apart in the family since his departure. Over those 3 years, Marilyn made choices few noticed. She gave up small indulgences, the expensive coffee at the bakery, the new coat in winter. Even her haircut became every 6 months. No one knew she recorded every expense in a blue notebook hidden in the kitchen drawer. To Nathan, her only son, she was just the retired mother who lived quietly in her modest home without any grand plans. To Tanya, her daughter-in-law, she was almost invisible, someone who showed up on holidays and always brought a gift for her grandchildren. The idea of taking everyone to Hawaii wasn't spur of the moment. Marilyn knew the last time the entire family had spent a few days together without rushing was Christmas 3 years ago. She believed that, away from the routine, Nathan and Tanya would remember what truly mattered: togetherness. She included not only them and their 2 grandchildren in the invitation, but also Tanya's parents and sister, because she wanted it to be a comprehensive gesture. In her heart, she believed this kind of generosity could heal any emotional fracture. The preparation was meticulous. She researched flights with short layovers, booked a beachfront hotel with rooms close to each other, arranged transfers so she wouldn't have to rely on taxis, and booked a special dinner on the beach for the last night. At this dinner, she planned to place a photo of James in the center of the table, surrounded by candles, so everyone could share stories about him. She believed that even children, even without memories of their own, would understand that true love leaves marks that span generations. 2 days before departure, while reviewing the confirmation list, her phone vibrated. It was a message from Nathan, short and to the point. "Mom, Tanya prefers to go with just her family. I think it's best if you don't go. You've already paid your part." The message was a dull, silent punch. Marilyn stared at the screen for a few minutes, trying to process it. The phrase, "You've already paid your part," echoed louder than any other detail. Suddenly, all the care, affection, and effort were reduced to a number in her bank account. There was no call. There was no explanation. Marilyn didn't respond. She sat in the kitchen chair, the blue notebook still open, and ran her finger over her notes. She felt anger, a mixture of sadness, and, strangely, clarity. It wasn't the first time she'd seen herself treated like a financial resource, but it was the first time she'd realized with absolute clarity that she was participating in this dynamic by choice. And in that moment, that choice no longer made sense. On the day of the trip, she knew exactly where each of them would be at the airport, the farewell photos they would post, the excited atmosphere, the suitcases full of summer clothes. And it was in that calculated moment that she opened her bank app and blocked the exclusive account from which the final payment for the reservations would be made. It wasn't a thoughtless act. It was decided with the same calm with which, years before, she had said yes to James at the altar. The difference was that this time, it wasn't about joining, but about ending. When the phone began to ring insistently, Marilyn switched it to silent mode and left it on the table. The messages piled up, first requests, then orders, and finally insults. She didn't read them all. She went to the living room, picked up James's photo, and placed it on the dresser. "You would have understood," she whispered. For the first time in a long time, she felt she wasn't reacting. She was deciding. As she disconnected from the attempts to contact her, Marilyn didn't feel the euphoria some might imagine. There was no revenge in her gesture, just an inner silence that occupied the space where anticipation had once resided. She spent the rest of that morning walking around the house, collecting small objects that reminded her of James, a straw hat he'd worn in Hawaii, a seashell brought back from there, and the napkin with a hand-drawn design from their first honeymoon dinner. Those items, kept for years, took on new meaning. They would be companions on the journey, even if now with different passengers. It was early afternoon that the idea began to take shape. While making tea, she remembered a group of women who frequented the neighborhood community center. Each one carried a story that somehow mirrored the feeling Marilyn knew well, being ignored, underestimated, or constantly relegated to the background. They were neighbors, acquaintances, women who shared shy laughter at occasional gatherings but rarely had a moment to themselves. She knew this invitation could be more transformative than any package tour. She called 6 of them. She didn't explain the details right away. She just said she had 6 places for an all-expenses-paid trip to Hawaii, and that the only condition was that they be willing to live a whole week away from the obligations and guilt they carried. At first, there was silence on the other end of the line, followed by nervous laughter and practical questions. "Is this serious? What's the catch? Are you sure?" Marilyn answered them all firmly. "I'm sure, and I want you to come." Of the day, the bags were already being packed. Marilyn handed each of them an envelope with their tickets and a small brochure about the hotel. She avoided turning it into a speech, but made it clear that she wasn't doing a favor. She was sharing something that was valuable to her and wanted it to be valuable to everyone. She felt strangely lighthearted, seeing the sparkle in the eyes of someone who wasn't used to receiving such grand gestures without having to earn them in some way. 2 days later, at the airport, the scene with her family was completely different from what she had imagined. There was no tension, no hidden demands. The women arrived dressed simply, with modest bags and smiles that tried to hide their nervousness. Some had never flown before, others had never left California. Marilyn realized that, unlike Nathan and Tanya, no one there was worried about controlling the experience. They were all ready to embrace it. Arriving in Hawaii was marked by the visual impact Marilyn remembered well. The humid air, the smell of salt, the almost unreal colors of the sea. The beachfront hotel was even more beautiful than in the photos, and she made sure everyone felt comfortable from the first moment. She arranged the rooms so no one was alone, encouraging conversation and exchanges from the very first night. The laughter began even before dinner, and Marilyn understood that what was emerging there wasn't just a travel group. It was a silent support network. On the 3rd day, she revealed the special plan, the seaside dinner that had originally been held in James's honor with his family. She explained who he was, what he represented, and how the trip had originally been planned. Some of them were moved even before nightfall. Marilyn knew she didn't have to reconstruct the past exactly as planned. Now, the tribute took on a different, perhaps even deeper, meaning. The beach was lit by candles, and James's photo sat at the center of the table, surrounded by the seashells Marilyn had brought. One by one, the women shared phrases Marilyn asked them to prepare, something they wanted to hear in their darkest moments. "You are not a burden," said one. "Your story matters," said another. "You are seen," added the third. Marilyn listened, smiled, and felt that this trip, though different from what she had planned, had become exactly what it needed to be. The day after dinner, Marilyn woke early and walked alone along the beach. The sun was still rising on the horizon, and the breeze carried the scent of the sea mixed with fresh coffee from the hotel restaurant. For the first time in a long time, she felt exactly where she was supposed to be, without the burden of pleasing or proving anything to anyone. She thought about how different that silence was from what she usually felt at home. It wasn't solitude, it was presence. The other women woke slowly, some bringing coffee to their rooms, others already eager to explore the island. Marilyn joined the group for a hike to a nearby waterfall. Along the way, she noticed how the conversations flowed naturally, mixing life stories, laughter, and even tears. There was a sincerity there she hadn't seen in years at family gatherings. No one was trying to keep up appearances. As the days passed, Marilyn noticed subtle changes. One of the women, who rarely spoke, began asking questions and offering her opinion on the group's choices. Another, who had initially avoided taking photos, now posed without embarrassment. It was as if this space away from obligations was allowing everyone to truly breathe. And deep down, Marilyn knew this was the most valuable part of the trip. On the penultimate night, the group decided to improvise a picnic on the beach without reservations or formalities. They bought fruit, bread, and cheese at the local market and stayed up late chatting under the stars. Marilyn watched every face, mentally capturing that moment. She thought about how different it would have been with Nathan and Tanya, where even the simplest gestures ended up surrounded by tension and anticipation. When the last day arrived, there was no sadness in the hotel farewell. There was gratitude. Each of the women embraced Marilyn as if recognizing a gesture that goes beyond the present. They promised to meet again, even if it was just for a simple coffee in the city. Marilyn believed them because she knew the connection created there didn't depend on luxury or distance. Back in California, her routine awaited her, but something had changed. She found upon arriving home was an email from Nathan. There was no apology, just a cold account of the losses from the canceled trip and a request for financial assistance to cover them. Marilyn read it to the end, closed her computer, and decided not to respond. There was no longer room for emotional negotiations disguised as family obligations. She knew that for too long, she had confused kindness with submission. The trip to Hawaii showed her that she could still offer love and support, but to those who truly valued it. The chosen family she formed in that group of women was proof of that. Now, when she looked at James's photo on her dresser, she felt proud. She had kept her promise to return to Hawaii, but she did it in a way he would surely approve. In the days following her return, Marilyn maintained her routine with the same discipline as always, but with a new lightness. She woke early, made her coffee, and opened the windows to let in the fresh air. There was no rush, no feeling of always owing someone something. The silence of the house no longer weighed heavily. Now it was a space of choice, not abandonment. At the community center, the 6 women began showing up more frequently. The simple act of meeting up to talk about their experiences in Hawaii created an energy that drew attention from others. Some came to ask about the trip, others just stopped by to listen. Marilyn realized that, unintentionally, she had started a circle of support that went far beyond a trip. One day, one of them, Clara, said that after the trip she found the courage to sign up for a photography course, something she'd always wanted to do but never allowed herself to. Another, Rosa, said she began declining invitations that came with hidden obligations, realizing her time was precious. Marilyn listened attentively, feeling the impact of that gesture multiply without her needing to control anything. Meanwhile, Nathan tried to contact her through other means. Handwritten messages arrived, delivered by mail, and even indirect messages from acquaintances, all revolved around the same topic: money. None of them acknowledged what had happened. Marilyn maintained the same stance, not responding. She knew that if she gave in once, everything would go back to the way it was. This new firmness wasn't accompanied by resentment. Marilyn didn't harbor hatred for her son, but rather a clear understanding that keeping her distance was the only way to protect herself. She didn't want fights, she just wanted peace. And peace now meant saying no without feeling guilty. Over time, she began investing some of the money she had saved in small renovations around the house. She painted the walls, changed curtains, and put new flowers in the garden. Each change was a visual reminder that life could be renewed even when some bonds were broken forever. The most symbolic step was transforming the guest room, previously reserved for Nathan and his family, into a welcoming space for friends. She bought a comfortable bed, new linens, and even a cabinet with chocolates and teas. She didn't expect frequent visitors, but she wanted anyone to find a place where they would feel truly welcome. The newly decorated room was used for the first time a few weeks later, when Helena, one of the women who had been in Hawaii, went through a difficult time and needed a place to stay for a few days. Marilyn welcomed her without asking invasive questions, offering only what she always wanted: presence and respect. The two spent nights talking in the kitchen, laughing, and also remaining silent when necessary. This simple and sincere exchange reinforced how much Marilyn had changed her way of relating to others. In the neighborhood, people began to notice this new phase. Marilyn, who had previously been seen as reserved and always busy, now appeared more often at fairs, events, and community gatherings. She wasn't seeking popularity, but by allowing herself to be more present, she ended up building new bonds. Some neighbors commented on how happier she seemed, and she, without going into details, simply smiled. One day, she received an invitation to give a short talk at the community center about transformative travel. At first, she hesitated. She didn't see herself as a public speaker, but remembering the impact her experience in Hawaii had on other women, she decided to accept. She prepared simply, bringing a few photos and telling her story without overexposing her family conflict, but making clear what she learned about boundaries and self-care. On the day of the talk, the room was packed. As she spoke, Marilyn noticed attentive eyes, some of them emotional. At the end, she received hugs and thanks, especially from people who identified with the feeling of being used or devalued by those they loved. She didn't see herself as an inspiration, but she understood that telling her story helped others see that there is always a choice. Nathan, however, remained distant and silent, except for the occasional attempt at indirect contact. Marilyn harbored no expectations of reconciliation. If it ever came, it would have to be accompanied by genuine respect. Until then, she preferred to keep the door closed to situations she already knew where they would lead. Meanwhile, she began planning new trips, this time without the burden of pleasing everyone. Her goal was now simple: to have meaningful experiences with people who wanted to be by her side by choice, not convenience. This shift in perspective made each step feel lighter, more aligned with what truly mattered. Hawaii was no longer just a destination or a memory for James. It became a milestone, a turning point. Marilyn realized that the trip wasn't the end of a frustrated dream, but the beginning of a life in which she decided who occupied her time, her energy, and her heart. This, for her, was the true victory. Over time, Marilyn began to realize was not only her lighter, new life, but also more authentic. She no longer conformed to anyone's expectations, nor did she feel obligated to maintain relationships solely based on blood ties. This didn't mean she had closed her heart. On the contrary, it was more open, but to the right people. Her energy was now directed toward bonds that brought reciprocity. The women who had traveled with her to Hawaii were still present, and the group had become almost a parallel family. They met monthly for lunches, walks, or simple get-togethers in Marilyn's backyard. On these occasions, they talked about everything, from small daily achievements to the challenges they still faced. There was something comforting in knowing they were all there by choice, not obligation. One afternoon, while watering the garden, Marilyn received an unexpected message. It was from a young woman at the community center, saying she had heard about her story and asking if she could talk. They scheduled a meeting for the next day, and the conversation lasted hours. The young woman, named Emily, bore the scars of an abusive relationship and said she felt lost. Marilyn listened more than she spoke, offering only simple but honest words. As they said goodbye, Emily said, "You made me believe I can still start over." That phrase echoed in her mind. These moments of sharing gave Marilyn new motivation. She realized that, without planning it, she had become a role model for other women seeking to reclaim their voice. It wasn't about creating a formal group or leading something large, but about being genuinely available, showing that it's possible to change the course of one's own story even after a long time. At the same time, Nathan continued his distancing. Family parties began to happen without invitations for Marilyn, and although she felt a pang of sadness at first, she learned not to take it as a loss. She no longer saw the point in insisting on being in spaces where her presence was not welcome. This, in a way, freed her to create new traditions and memories with people who truly valued her. One morning, leafing through the blue notebook where she had recorded every savings for the trip, Marilyn decided to start new entries, this time not to fund something for others, but to invest in herself. She wrote on the first page, "For experiences that bring me joy." This simple gesture symbolized a definitive break with the old dynamic of silent sacrifice. The new goal was clear from the start: to visit places she'd always dreamed of, without worrying about whether anyone would approve. It wouldn't be about proving anything, but about living fully. Hawaii had been a fresh start, and now she wanted to continue writing this new story. Marilyn began researching destinations leisurely, as if savoring every possibility. She jotted down ideas, watched travel videos, and read stories from people exploring the world alone. She discovered that there were packages geared toward mature women traveling together, something she never would have considered before. Now, the idea of experiencing new people and cultures without the burden of family obligations seemed exciting. Meanwhile, life in the neighborhood continued peacefully. Marilyn maintained her routine of calm mornings and afternoons filled with small activities. She began volunteering with an adult literacy project at the community center, something that connected her with stories and trajectories very different from her own. Each person she met reinforced her conviction that the world was much bigger than the limited circle she had previously tried to fit into. One afternoon downtown, she was surprised by a visit from Helena, one of her Hawaiian friends. Helena brought a bag of fresh fruit and a simple note. "Thank you for showing me that life isn't over for me." Marilyn read it, smiled, and put the note in a box where she collected small reminders of moments that truly mattered. Little by little, she realized that the meetings with her group of friends were inspiring other women to reach out. Some came to share their own pain, others just to listen. There were no formulas or rehearsed speeches. It was just the genuine exchange that, for many, was a rare thing. One day, she received a message from Tanya. It wasn't an apology nor an attempt at rapprochement, but a brief sentence. "The children miss you." Marilyn read it carefully, reflected, and simply replied, "I miss them too. You can visit me whenever you want." There was no resentment, but there was also no willingness to put herself in a position of exploitation again. If there was to be a reunion, it would have to be healthy. This clarity of boundaries was something Marilyn learned to cultivate. She understood that love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself to the point of exhaustion. It means offering what's healthy and preserving your own space. It was a lesson that would have changed a lot if she had learned it earlier, but now it was a pillar of her life. At the end of a group meeting in the backyard, Marilyn looked around and saw the women laughing, exchanging stories, and planning new activities. She realized that without realizing it, she had created an environment that conveyed belonging, something she hadn't always found in her own family. And this, more than any trip, was the true treasure she carried. On a sunny Saturday morning, Marilyn received an unexpected invitation. One of the women in the group wanted to take her to a small coastal town a few hours away. The outing wasn't grand, but for Marilyn, any opportunity to explore something new now held special value. She immediately accepted and spent the day exploring artisan shops, walking along the pier, and sampling local dishes she'd never tried before. During lunch, he realized he no longer worried about justifying his choices or measuring his words. He was simply living in the moment, something that had previously seemed impossible. Laughter flowed effortlessly, and the weight of old wounds seemed increasingly distant. The trip to Hawaii had been the turning point, but it was in small days like that that the transformation took hold. When she returned home, she found a letter in Nathan's handwriting in her mailbox. She didn't open it right away. She left it on the table and made some tea before deciding whether to read it. When she finally opened it, she found a short note asking to talk. There was no apology, just a vague sentence. "I think we need to work things out." Marilyn sighed, folding the paper. She knew that working things out for him probably meant resuming the old dynamic, and that, for her, was no longer an option. He put the letter away without responding. There was no anger in his gesture, just the certainty that he didn't want to put himself in situations that would nullify his achievements. In the past, he would have felt guilty or even rushed to fulfill the request. Now, he felt only peace in respecting his own limits. The weeks passed, and the group continued to grow stronger. They began organizing themed gatherings, where each person brought a dish and told a memorable story from their life. For Marilyn, these gatherings were more than just leisure. They were a way to nurture something that couldn't be bought or asked for, true belonging. At one of these meetings, Emily, the young woman who had sought her advice, emotionally shared that she had landed a job in another city and was ready to start over. She thanked Marilyn for listening and encouraging her, saying that their conversation had been the starting point. Marilyn felt proud, not because she was seen as a savior, but because she knew that her example could shine a light in dark moments for others. As time passed, the painful memories of her biological family faded. They weren't erased, but they no longer defined who she was. Marilyn now saw herself as someone who had forged her own path, surrounded by carefully chosen relationships. And this freedom was undoubtedly the greatest gift she could have given herself. In early fall, Marilyn decided to do something she'd long put off: print a photo album from her trip to Hawaii. She spent hours choosing images that captured spontaneous laughter, sunset conversations, and moments of pure relaxation. As she leafed through the finished album, she felt that each page told not just a story of a trip, but a life-changing experience. It was a physical reminder that she had managed to transform a situation of rejection into an experience of genuine connection. She took the album to one of the group meetings, and together they revisited each memory. Between funny comments and emotional sighs, it was clear that the trip had left a mark on everyone. One of them even joked, "We need another adventure like that." Marilyn smiled, making no promises, but certain that new stories would come. Shortly after, she received an unexpected call from Tanya. Her daughter-in-law didn't mention the past directly, but asked if Marilyn would like to see her grandchildren. She agreed on one condition. The meeting would be at her house, in a setting where she felt safe. Tanya accepted, and a few days later, the children came running through the gate, bringing with them an energy Marilyn hadn't felt in a long time. The reunion was simple: juice, cookies, and stories about school. Marilyn avoided questions about the canceled trip or family tensions. She preferred to enjoy every minute of her grandchildren's presence, listening to their laughter and answering their curiosities. When they said goodbye, she felt a mixture of joy and caution. She knew she needed to protect this connection so it wouldn't be used as a bargaining chip. This careful consideration of boundaries was also reflected in other areas of her life. Marilyn learned to say no more naturally, without over-excusing herself. Gradually, this stopped being a defensive stance and became a healthy way of living. Those who truly wanted to be by her side understood and respected this new way of positioning themselves. One afternoon, while walking through the park, she was approached by a woman who recognized her face from the talk at the community center. She thanked her, saying that after hearing her story, she found the courage to leave an abusive situation. Marilyn was silent for a few seconds, absorbing the weight of this revelation. She realized that her decision, made months ago in the silence of the kitchen, had a far-reaching impact she never imagined. Over time, she understood that she didn't need grand gestures to continue inspiring. She simply had to live according to her values and remain true to the new life she had built. The transformation was no longer an isolated moment. It was part of who she was now. At the end of that year, Marilyn decided to hold a small celebration at home. It wasn't Christmas nor a birthday, just an evening to gather the people who had been part of her new phase. She carefully set the table, placed fresh flowers, and lit candles, creating a welcoming atmosphere. The group arrived gradually, each bringing something to share, and the house filled with voices, laughter, and familiar scents. During dinner, Marilyn realized that the room, previously marked by heavy silences, was now brimming with life. There was no tension, no measured words to avoid conflict. Everything was light and spontaneous. She looked around and realized she was surrounded by people who genuinely wanted to be there, and that made all the difference. At the end of the evening, one of the guests made an impromptu toast, thanking Marilyn for being the bridge to so many new friendships. She, moved, raised her glass and simply said, "Thank you for being here. You are my family too." It wasn't a rehearsed phrase, but it came from the heart. In the days that followed, she continued to feel the energy of that encounter. It was as if she had realized once and for all that she no longer needed to chase after those who didn't value her. What she had around her was enough, and more than that, it was true. With this clarity, he resumed planning the solo trip he'd been nurturing since Hawaii. He chose a destination he'd always dreamed of visiting and began working out the details. There was no rush, but each step of the planning process brought the feeling that he was building something uniquely his own without relying on anyone else's approval. When she told the group, she received immediate support and even itinerary suggestions. Some friends joked that they would go along, But Marilyn knew that this time she needed this experience alone. It was a symbol of her autonomy and a gift to herself. On a quiet afternoon, sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, she reflected on everything that had happened, from the shock of Nathan's message to the moment she decided to freeze her account, from the flight to Hawaii to the new friendships and reunions. Each step had been a conscious choice to put herself first. And this, more than any destination, was the true journey she was experiencing. A few days before her new trip, Marilyn received another letter from Nathan. Unlike the previous ones, this one was more restrained. He said he was reflecting on many things and that perhaps he had overreacted in some decisions in the past. There wasn't a full apology, but there was room for conversation. Marilyn read it calmly, taking her time to respond. She knew that whatever her decision, she wouldn't give up the balance she had achieved. He put the letter in a drawer and decided he wouldn't think about it until he got back. He learned that not everything needs to be resolved immediately, and that some conversations should only happen when there's respect on both sides. For the first time, he felt he had control over his own time and what he let into his life. On the day of departure, as she zipped up her suitcase, she slipped a small envelope inside the zipper. Inside was a photo of her with James in Hawaii, taken decades earlier, and a recent photo with her group of friends on the same beach. They were two moments separated by years and circumstances, but together they told a story of fulfilled promises, new beginnings, and freedom. Before leaving, she looked at the tidy house, the garden in bloom, and the guest room ready for guests. She smiled, closed the door, and headed to the airport, certain that she wasn't traveling to escape anything, but to continue building everything she had already started. A life made of her own choices, genuine love, and the courage to never again settle for less than she deserved. On the plane, sitting by the window, Marilyn watched the runway recede as the aircraft gained altitude. She felt no anxiety or doubt, just a new sense of peace. Looking up at the clouds, she realized that this moment represented not just the beginning of another journey, but the confirmation that she had reclaimed her own life. She wasn't going to please anyone or meet expectations. She was going because she wanted to, and that was enough. During the flight, she picked up the envelope containing the photos and held it in her hands for a few minutes. She didn't need to open it to remember every detail of the two images. The first, with James, carried the memory of a love that strengthened her. The second, with her friends, symbolized the proof that she could create new stories without losing who she was. These two versions of herself, the woman who loved deeply and the woman who learned to love herself, now walked hand in hand. Upon reaching her destination, she took a deep breath and felt the different air, full of possibilities. There was no rush to explore because she knew each step would be hers and for her. She smiled as she remembered all the times she believed her life was already defined and the best was in the past. She was there to prove, especially to herself, that it's always possible to start over. When she returned home weeks later, she found Nathan's letter in the same place she'd left it. She still wasn't sure if she would respond, and that no longer bothered her. The important thing was that now, this decision would be hers to make, in her own time and on her own terms. As she entered, she looked at the guest room, the garden, the photo of James on the dresser. She felt a quiet pride. Marilyn had not only fulfilled the promise she'd made years ago, she had created a life where she no longer had to prove anything to anyone. And for her, that was the greatest victory.